is a movement starting in just the philanthropic sector called community-centered fundraising, which is kind of questioning some of the traditional modes of donor-centric fundraising, which I think they can both live together. It's not one or the other, but it's this idea of kind of really challenging where wealth has come from in our country, especially, and that a lot of wealth has been generated on the backs of marginalized communities, which I think is really, really important to start thinking about.
Welcome to an interview episode of Tech in the Arts, brought to you by the Arts Management and Technology Lab at Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Victoria Sprowls, the podcast producer, and today I will be speaking with Rachel Hite, the Advancement Officer at the Andy Warhol Museum here in Pittsburgh, and Liz McFarlin-Marciak, the Director of Major and Planned Giving at the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. Thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having us.
Have you seen similar patterns in your organizations to the trends in giving nationally, with significantly more giving during the height of the pandemic and less so in 2022?
So I will say the caveat that I work primarily with individual donors, but anecdotally, it feels to me that corporate giving is way down, which feels counterintuitive given what we know about how well corporations have been doing in the last couple of years.
Very true.
But I did see a big increase in individual giving at the height of the pandemic. I feel like people really took it as a call to action, and some of our stalwart donors really stepped up to the plate. And I wouldn't say there's a decrease necessarily, but it's more event motivated at this point, I would say.
So kind of a flattening of,
yes.
There's not really spikes in giving anymore.
I wouldn't.
Except if it's surrounding an event.
Yes, yeah.
Got you.
I think people are ready to get out on the town.
It's really interesting because I switched jobs during the pandemic. So I was formerly at the Carnegie Museums, where Rachel works now, and then switched to human services. And food banking in particular has seen a ridiculous increase in support. It's all of that crisis support that we typically see in times of heightened need. And so everything just spiked dramatically. And it's been really interesting because we've been having a hard time trying to figure out, where are we going to normalize? Like, we know we're going to normalize. There's going to be a normalization that's really standard with crisis fundraising. And we're just now starting to see things normalize on all fronts. I'd say corporate and foundation for us is normalizing sooner than with individual giving, kind of for the same reasons that Rachel mentioned. Individuals are just amazing and are continuing to be generous in so many ways during this time period. But we kind of expected that, so we're seeing it. But we're still kind of ending up where there's a larger increase than pre-pandemic times.
That's really heartening to hear, especially as everything in the news today is all about inflation and how horrible the economy is doing, that people still find, not only the time, but the resources to give.
Absolutely.
More so for Rachel, while museum membership acquisition is often generated on site in order to support the organization or gain immediate benefits like discounts in the gift shop, what are the patterns you're seeing for acquisition and retention as we emerge from the peak of the pandemic?
I do love a gift shop discount. Say that. I mean, there was an enormous dip in membership, of course, and I was at a different museum during the beginning and peak of the pandemic, but people are coming back. And I mean, as I mentioned, I think people are really, of course, COVID is not over, but people are ready to leave their houses and go do things. And I think that's motivating. We're getting back up to our pre-pandemic membership numbers. And the Carnegie Museums took the time to kind of reevaluate what our role in the community is, and we've introduced a couple of new types of membership that are doing really well. We have a free teen membership that is wildly exceeding our expectations. So, it's definitely increasing back up to and even surpassing pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, that's great. I know that during the pandemic, a lot of organizations took a look at DEI work in a greater way. And even if you do have the free teen program, attracting younger people that then eventually get paying jobs and will be paying customers. Yeah.
Yeah. Create, starting the philanthropist young. We love it.
I just think too, because I was definitely there when we took the biggest hits on membership, and there's a lot of stuff that happened. Most membership acquisition actually happens through direct mail. There's a huge direct mail program happening behind the scenes. So a lot of on-site conversions. I think there's a misconception that that's the only way that museums acquire new members. It's probably the most true at the Science Center of all the 4 Carnegie Museums. They probably took a huge hit in on-site
Yeah.
acquisition for membership. But it kind of leads into the next question too, because I think the virtual benefits was probably a way that the museums really kind of pivoted during the pandemic
Absolutely.
to actually bring back.
For listeners, my next question is, what are the pros and cons of virtual benefits?
I mean, the obvious, most enormous pro is accessibility.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're able to welcome people from all over the world, and it's, it removes the barrier to entry. Like, museums are physically intimidating places, and if you're not, you don't grow up with access to them, it can be hard to even walk in the door. So offering virtual programs, people can kind of get more used to what their local museum is offering them.
Yeah, I know I often even feel like, I know the Met Gala just happened when we're recording this, and I'm always like, oh yes, fancy museum gala events that I cannot go to.
But would love to go to.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting. I think actually this is relevant for having Rachel as a co-guest on this one with me, because I actually think some of the stuff that Warhol did during the pandemic with virtually was amazing. They did a lot of school tours, are probably one of the biggest things that the museums here in Pittsburgh do and around the country. And I remember the staff was so ingenious at the Warhol, the education staff. They literally propped up like an iPad on a roving cart and were able to take schools who were in Florida, not even locally, through this amazing museum and have this incredible content that is paired with this experience. I'm like, look at that. Why did it take us a pandemic to really start thinking about how amazing virtual programming can be and what benefit it can be to just people who don't live locally? I mean, it's incredible.
Do you see those trends staying? Because I know we did just have David Nutt on the podcast, and he was talking about how the lyric opera, they all graduated in the same year, listeners. So he was talking about how the lyric opera did a lot of pandemic programming, or did at least some pandemic programming, but that, now that the pandemic is quote unquote not over, but people are opening up again, that they weren't going to do that going forward. So are you seeing those trends continue?
We definitely at the Warhol, I mean, like Liz was saying, that those education programs were so impactful and well done, and I certainly think we will continue those. I hope so.
It feels like it's a hybridized world that we're going to be living in going forward, where being thoughtful about either having still full virtual programming or having a virtual option feels like you're leaving engagement on the table. From a fundraising perspective, we know that we might be able to reach more people, and not just people who don't live in Pittsburgh, but people who are busy, who are working, who have jobs, or who might not just feel comfortable coming in person for reasons that are unrelated to the pandemic. So we still see a lot of value, and there's lots of pros to virtual. The cons for us at the food bank, obviously our location, we're in Duquesne, PA, which is about a mile from Kennywood. It's a little out of the way because we're a huge warehouse, so we need a lot of space. So it's not the most accessible place to come and visit us all the time. So virtual programming is really important for us and kind of helps with that location challenge. It's just nothing can replace face-to-face, though. So, we're happy that face-to-face feels safer now, and it feels that people are more comfortable doing it. You just can't replace that.
No, and the way I like to fundraise, I'm so grateful to be able to, go take someone out to a cup of coffee and have a conversation. It's completely different.
So speaking of fundraising, what do you think about Yellowstone National Park's $1,500 inheritance pass, which is essentially an annual pass valid in 2172, and a complimentary annual pass to enjoy the park now valid for the next year as a method of fundraising?
So I had never heard of this until you shared it with us. This is super interesting, and I sent it immediately to my colleague who works in annual giving at the food bank. My brain is the practical stuff. How is this going to work? What all that. If you scale that back, obviously the promotion and marketing are beautiful. The park is incredibly beautiful. I just think they should have used it more for plan giving than annual giving. Because
explain that a little further.
So if you give a $1,500 gift a year, you're getting this inheritance pass that you can use and pass down through your family, which is an amazing concept. It's just, do you then have to do that every single year from an annual giving standpoint?
Instead of a one-time,
if you're making an estate commitment, which all ties into the whole legacy stuff, that seems like a better fit for using that from a technical standpoint in fundraising. But I love anything related to multi-generational philanthropy. So I think the concept is like really intriguing.
I get what they're doing. Like, it's a profound statement. Like, you're investing in our environment and our natural resources now so that your future family can enjoy it. It's a nice story they're telling with that.
But I think you are right that it would have been better for planned giving, right? Especially as, I hear just on podcasts and in the news all the time from organizations that say that planned giving is so much, more efficient and better and just allows the organization to plan better for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking about it too, again, it's interesting. It's hard for us like fundraisers to look at some of that stuff because I feel like our tendency is just like pick it all apart. I'm like, so some of the language that they use is like your $1,500 will help support preservation 150 years. I'm like, no, they're using that $1,500 in their current year operating budget. Like that's not like technically what's happening.
A little bit between the marketing and the actual implementation.
So I just don't wonder how I'm concerned about that in terms of renewing and retaining annual donors at that $1,500 level is like my biggest concern with it. But as a concept, I think it's really unique. And I love the idea of like providing something tangible that can then be like this heirloom that you pass down through generations. Yeah. That is very cool.
Historically, religious groups have received the largest annual share of charitable donations. What is the case that you both make for giving at your nonprofits, and how do you motivate support from individuals as we move from a pandemic into a period of higher inflation, as I was talking about?
I will say that in my previous role in Chicago, when the pandemic hit, we did have a little bit of a, what are we really asking you to do right now? It's a museum. And of course, I obviously think museums are fundamental to our communities, but it felt a little unimportant for a while there with everything going on. But I will say the Warhol is doing some very exciting community-based stuff. Stay tuned May 20th for an exciting announcement. But the way we're motivating people, and part of what I love about Pittsburgh specifically is people are really committed to investing in our community assets, and that's what I've had the most success with.
I've really never seen a city that has so much city pride.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to come back and work here in fundraising. It's people, and young people in particular, are really, it's important to them to preserve what makes our city so great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's like a reason why religious organizations receive the highest share of funds from individuals. There are like positives and negatives behind that reason. So I'm just going to focus kind of on like the positives for this. And that's really that it's like built into the teachings. The importance of helping others is an important tenet, I believe, in most, if not all, religions. So from my perspective, I mean, obviously working in a human services organization now, like we have seen people shift their philanthropy maybe away from arts and culture to helping with this basic need. I think it's just really important that philanthropists find their purpose and use their purpose to really drive impact through their philanthropy and like stick with it. I've talked recently with like a local wealth management advisor who always advises her clients, like, try not to deviate from what your core values are, even in times of crisis, because clearly those core values mean something to you and are important. So when we think of like, the whole entire sector of Pittsburgh, the nonprofit sector thrives and is better because of people giving to all different types of things and giving through what they truly believe in. And I really, really believe that. So I've experienced both in the arts and in human services that, if you're really true and genuine working with donors and helping them find maybe a cause to give to that's not your organization, that's great. Because we all do better and we all thrive better, and everything at the whole is like super interconnected.
Absolutely.
Like, it's interesting when we think of like food and the arts, it's like, think about the whole person. We want the whole person to thrive, whether it's just a basic need like food or whether it's something like education and access to cultural resources. So, all in all, yes, there is like obviously a breakdown of where most people give their money, but at the end of the day, I just want people to give money.
No, I like that. I like the a rising tide lifts all ships kind of mentality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
What are the biggest changes you've seen in philanthropy and planned giving surrounding DEAI initiatives, especially since the pandemic?
So many new grants available.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't work in grants, but foundations and government I think are giving a lot more specifically to those initiatives.
I think this movement started pre-COVID, I believe, but there is a movement starting in just the philanthropic sector called community-centered fundraising, which is kind of questioning some of the traditional modes of donor-centric fundraising, which I think they can both live together. It's not one or the other, but it's this idea of kind of really challenging where wealth has come from in our country, especially, and that a lot of wealth has been generated on the backs of marginalized communities, which I think is really, really important to start thinking about. And also acknowledging that a lot of philanthropists are white, and how does that play into white saviorism and poverty tourism? There's like a lot of interesting pieces that have come out that are challenging to deal with as a fundraiser who, we've worked in the time where that's not kind of like the focus, but it's really important conversations that I think everyone's having now. And I think our role as fundraisers is shifting a little bit for the better, where, our focus, if we're doing our job, we are true partners facilitating a relationship between donors and the organization we work for. And it behooves us to be honest about things. So at the food bank, we're really looking at the root causes of food insecurity. And there's a lot of parts of that have to do with systemic racism and poverty that have affected more people than that have others for really not great reasons. And I think it's important when we talk to donors that, we need to put more resources into communities that have had that, who have been historically excluded. So it's an interesting time to be a fundraiser, and I'm glad that these shifts are happening.
Me too. There's a lot more motivation, and people have educated themselves and are ready to make different and better maybe choices about how they're giving. And I will add that I am very pleased. Both museums I've worked at in the past couple of years, we have paid internships now, which is
that's amazing,
critical.
Especially, I know for the nonprofit sector has not always been the case.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's so important to increase access to these opportunities by paying people for their time.
Yeah, definitely. And then last question, what are the most helpful technologies for you in your work? And if you were to look into the future, do you see any big changes at the intersection of technology and planned giving, fundraising in the future?
I'm going to sound like a big nerd. I love Razor's Edge.
Razor's Edge?
Yes, right? Yeah, I get that laugh a lot. It is our donor management database, and I've used it at all of my fundraising jobs. When used correctly, the data is so valuable. I love it.
Okay, so why are you laughing about this?
It's a hot
nerdy
mess.
It's a nerdy
just nerdy.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole science behind fundraising that I think people don't really, unless you work in the sector, know about. It's not just like fluffy galas and talking to people over coffee. There's like an actual structure of how we, identify people who could be potential prospects, how we prioritize, how we track movement through solicitation cycles, cultivation cycles. It's really interesting. So having like good processes will make whatever system like Razor's Edge that you end up using better. Mm-hmm. So really like that process part and leaning into the process part is
data hygiene.
Yes. Yeah. And being kind of data-informed decision-making is actually like really critical. I mean, I can give an example at the food bank. I mean, in the pandemic, we added 45,000 plus new donors, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's incredible.
And we have a team of about 16 people who work in fundraising, but it's just me and my two wonderful teammates, Erin and Harmony, who are just working through all these individuals, families, and family foundations. Like, we can't work with every single person in the exact same amount of time, and so we have to prioritize, and that's where having like good systems is really, really important.
Using the technology to kind of decide where to put your resources and time.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we need to do what's best for the organization and ultimately the people we serve. So we need to make sure that we're putting our resources where we're going to have the biggest impact on the community. Yeah. So that's super important. I definitely am nerding out about some tech pieces for sure. I do a lot of non-cash asset giving at the food bank, and so working with people on their estate plans. Free Will is definitely one of my favorites right now. They're like a tech company that has started in the last couple years, and they help people literally just make free wills online.
Oh, interesting.
It's really cool, and we've actually think we officially hit the 1 million mark in new commitments.
Wow.
Working with this one vendor since July of last year, so I'm really excited about that, and I'm pretty interested in crypto at this point too.
In fundraising?
Yeah.
Ooh, tell me more.
We're starting to accept, working through the vehicle to accept crypto for memberships.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really cool. Same. We're exploring avenues right now of working with a third party to set up an acceptance for crypto. It's one of the fastest rising mediums for young philanthropists, which is interesting. It's super volatile, and who knows what the future really holds.
But if they want to give, they can give.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the things to pay attention to now. Even Venmo and PayPal, having think of how do people give, and how do you make sure that you as a nonprofit have those vehicles to accept and acknowledge gifts in the way that people want to make them.
Because we're leaving money on the table if we don't make giving as easy as possible.
Yeah, I like that.
It's also, too, there's so much research specifically on non-cash giving. So you think stocks or crypto or people who use their IRAs to give, usually they give more. The average gift is higher, which is really interesting. So yeah, those are probably the biggest areas that we're kind of paying attention to for the future, of thinking of what types of other non-cash assets and how can we really engage people to give through those mediums.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was incredibly informative. I had no idea about cryptocurrency and fundraising. Yeah.
Wild.
And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. We're slowing our stream for the summer, but looking forward to sharing all the news and emerging technology with you this September. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, send this to another arts aficionado in your life. You can let us know what you thought by visiting our website, amped-lab.org. That's amt-lab.org. Or you can email us at ampedlabcmu@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Tech in the Arts, or on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. We'll see you for the next episode.